Alright guys, so there's 10 NBA teams that have never won a championship. The Denver Nuggets removed themselves from this list just last year. Now of course, we all know as NBA fans, winning a championship is hard. Staying on this list is even harder in so many ways because so many teams that have already won just tend to keep winning. So let's dive into which 10 teams have never won a championship before in the NBA. First up, I got the Brooklyn Nets. Now give the Nets some love for trying even though their most recent plan was faulty at best. They convinced Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden to team up, and they have nothing to show for it. Mainly because the one full year that all three of them were together, injuries to Kyrie and Harden definitely messed everything up. Then Harden wanted out, and then Kyrie wanted out, and then eventually Kevin was just basically forced to start somewhere else. Now they got guys like Ben Simmons, and that's an unfortunate disaster. But on top of that, at least on the positive side, they got stars like Mikal Bridges, Cam Thomas, Cam Johnson, and some other solid rotational guys. I don't think it'll happen anytime soon, but if they do develop some of this young talent and this young core and maybe add some better pieces around them, maybe in the near future they might actually have a shot at winning a chip. Now second on the list, I have the Charlotte Hornets. Now this is crazy to think, but since the Charlotte Hornets even became the Hornets from their Bobcat days back in 2004, they've only been to the playoffs 3 times, winning only 3 games total throughout all this time. Now, I don't know how much of this has to do with the Michael Jordan and his not too shabby ownership skills, but now that that's done, they seem to be making some decent adjustments in bettering the team overall. Now, they got LaMelo Ball, Miles Bridges, Brandon Miller, Terry Rozier, PJ Washington, and some other decent rotational players. Personally, I think that they should have went with Scoot Henderson instead of Brandon Miller. And that's not to say that Brandon Miller is bad by any means, but I do think that Scoot's upside is a lot higher. I get the whole, don't draft Henderson because you already have LaMelo Ball at the point, but still, you got to pick the best guy in the draft. And after Wembanyama, Scoot was really the next guy up. And even in the past, they had way too many bad draft situations that didn't help. Emeka Okafor, Adam Morrison, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, and Cody Zeller were all top 10 picks, and they didn't really amount to much for the Hornets. So either they just have really bad luck, or a really bad scouting department, or a really bad drafting department, or honestly, maybe they're just simply not a winning organization. Hopefully that changes in the near future. Now third on the list, I have the Indiana Pacers. So guys like Reggie Miller and Rick Smits were pretty damn good, but just not enough to beat guys like Shaq and Kobe at the turn of the century. Years later, Paul George was pretty solid, but those Pacer teams were a few stars too short against the big 3 Heat. And now Indiana seems years away from any championship buzz unless they somehow pull off a Hoosiers-like miracle in the near future. Now they do have some solid guys as well. Tyrese Halliburton, Bruce Brown, Buddy Hield, Miles Turner, and the new addition of Obi Toppin. But being transparent here, this is nowhere near enough to even be close to contending for a title. They got a long way to go. Now, next up on the list, I have the LA Clippers. And man, where do I start with this team? Lob City became Robbed City like a decade ago because of the untimely injuries to Blake Griffin and Chris Paul during their franchise heyday, just kind of ruining everything for them. Now, much has been the same lately with injuries to George and Kawhi Leonard, and it didn't help when the Clippers constantly blew leads in the playoffs. Now, basically, this franchise has been perpetually stuck by a string of really bad luck and also bad personnel decisions. Steve Ballmer seems to be a great owner and really involved with his team. Russell Westbrook seems to actually be a much better fit on this team than on the Lakers. And truthfully, they have so many really, really good role players like Norman Powell, Terrence Mann, Marcus Morris Sr., Bones Highland, Zubats, and Mason Plumlee. I mean, hell, they even managed to somehow add Kenyon Martin Jr. and Kobe Brown. I mean, this is a super deep team. But when it comes to the playoffs, they always manage to fail for some odd reason. It's sad to see, but maybe one day the Clippers' curse might be removed. Now, next up on the list, I have the Memphis Grizzlies. And this is an interesting one because they have the distinction of not only losing their Canadian roots in Vancouver, but watching Toronto, which came into the league the same year as them, get a title before the Grizzlies with them having Kawhi. Now, the Grizzlies had only one stretch where they could literally smell a championship in the distance, and that was with the grit and grind teams of Tony Allen, Mike Conley, Marc Gasol, and Zach Randolph. They've got a future right now with Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr., and they had a good set of regular seasons the last few years, but the bright lights still managed to freeze them in the long run. Now, I really hope that Ja just continues to focus on the game, get off of social media, and just stop hanging around with homies that have guns. It's honestly a really bad look, and he should just focus on his career right now. They got rid of Dylan Brooks, which I think is addition by subtraction, and having guys like Desmond Bane, Steven Adams, and Brandon Clark, as long as he remains healthy, should really help their dynamic. Now, they are a deep team, and they are close to a championship run in general, so I would consider them probably one of the closest of all these 10 teams that I'm listing to be towards a championship. So we'll see what happens. Now, next up, I have the Minnesota Timberwolves. They never went to the finals with Kevin Garnett for over a decade. I honestly think that at the time, that was their best chance, and not only did they miss it, but Garnett cashed in with the Celtics the year after he left Minnesota, which is freaking crazy. But after Kevin Garnett, they basically went on a long dry spell where nothing really went right. And finally now, with the whole dumb trade that they added on with Rudy Gobert and how much that costed them, I think it really hindered them even further. I mean, they are really lucky to have Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns for at least a decent shot of maybe having the potential of winning a chip one day, but for now, it's not really looking that great. Next up on the list is the New Orleans Pelicans. Now, the franchise has been in existence since 1988. Their biggest miscue was giving Larry Johnson, which was then the largest contract in NBA history, and his current deal still had 2 more years to run, which essentially made it impossible for them to retain Alonzo Mourning, who was then considered the better player. Johnson developed lower back issues and was never the same, and Mourning went to Miami, who eventually won a title there, and then the franchise moved to New Orleans. Now, the Pelicans got screwed out of Anthony Davis wanting to leave to the Lakers, and basically the rest is history from there. Now, getting guys like Zion, Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, Larry Nance, and Valanciunas still makes me think that they're actually a really solid team. They are young, energetic, they can defend and be a offensive powerhouse, but Zion really has to be healthy, man. This guy barely plays pretty much any season. I also do like the addition of Jose Alvarado too. This guy's a scrappy guy, and he has a really bright future if he continues to develop his game. Next up on the list, I have Orlando Magic. Now, the Magic had the misfortune of being blessed with 2 dominant big men, and they still couldn't win a chip. First, Shaquille O'Neal, and then Dwight Howard. Both of whom they've drafted were unable to bulldoze their way through the playoffs by themselves. Shaq then bailed in his prime for the Lakers and won 3 chips there. And then eventually, they then drafted Dwight Howard, and he also left as well. And when he did leave, he went to the Lakers, eventually, and he also won a championship with the Lakers too. So I'm surprised that the Magic don't hold a grudge against the Lakers. They've literally poached and won titles with their main studs throughout the years. For now, they do have some solid young guys like Banchero, Fultz, Isaac, Suggs, the Wagner brothers, Carter Jr., Jet Howard, Anthony Black, the list goes on. But give these guys another few years to get older, build chemistry, fix the roster around the edges, and honestly, you never know. Maybe they squeeze a championship out. Next up, I got the Phoenix Suns. Now, of all the non-championship winning teams, the Suns are probably dealing with the hardest luck, if only because they've had a number of very good teams that just couldn't cash it in. Think of the Charles Barkley Suns of the late 90s who couldn't overcome Michael Jordan and then Hakeem Olajuwon, and the Steve Nash Suns who were victimized by a Robert Horry hip check in 2007, and then most recently the whole Devin Booker Suns, unable to hold a 2-0 lead against Giannis Antetokounmpo and the Bucks in 2021 to win the championship, which they still lost. Now they have Kevin Durant, a 2-time champ, but he might have saved his prime years for the Warriors instead of the Suns. Now with the new owner, Matt Ishbia, going in with the all-in approach with the roster and somehow managed to do a good job with a tight salary cap, we got to see what actually happens. He managed to get Bradley Beal, retained DeAndre Ayton, kept Okogie, TJ Warren, Damian Lee, Torrey Craig, and managed to sign guys like Watanabe, Bol Bol, Eubanks, Terrence Ross, Bismack Biyombo, and Eric Gordon. I mean, wow, that's not easy to do. But if you bring a lot of star-studded players onto a team, then a lot of solid role guys don't mind taking a veteran minimum to win a chip. So I think this is it. I think they maybe have 1 or 2 years with this team to win in the near future. If it doesn't happen with what they have now, I think they will be on a dry spell for a while. Now, last on the list, I have Utah Jazz. Karl Malone and John Stockton. They are probably the easiest tandem to never get crowned. Such was the case with them and the others in the 1990s who couldn't overcome Jordan. It's unfathomable, really, because with those two all-time greats, the Jazz were true contenders for roughly a dozen years. With nobody on the current roster on the level of Stockton and Malone, Utah might need to move mountains to get back into the mix. They've got Markkanen, Clarkson, Olynyk, Walker Kessler, and now John Collins. They do have a good amount of future picks too, but they really have to get this young core to mesh together for a while before we see a potential win. But that's it, guys. That's the list. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe for more videos every day.